for nothing is evil in the beginning, even Sauron was not so. Today on MyGovanen we cover the motives of Sauron. The ways and motives of Sauron, the second Dark Lord of Middle-earth, greatly differ from those of Morgoth, his master, the prime Dark Lord and sub-creative rebel against Eru Ilúvatar. And although Sauron is his chief servant, their ultimate goals are dissimilar. As every being in Tolkien's world, in his origin, Sauron is not evil, but a Maya of the Vala Aule, known then as Myron, a great craftsman and one extremely mighty in the lore of Aule's people. Before time itself, Myron participates in the Ainulindale, the music of the Ainur, which results in the creation of the universe. But while Melkor weaves into his music thoughts of his own, unlike those of his brethren, and discord arises about him, Myron is more attentive to the thoughts of the other Ainur. In this way, Sauron was also wiser than Melkor Morgoth. Sauron was not a beginner of discord, and he probably knew more of the music than did Melkor, whose mind had always been filled with his own plans and devices, and gave little attention to other things. Myron's passion lies in order, and therefore he dislikes chaos, which proves to be the ultimate goal of his master. In the end, this obsession overcomes Sauron's love for the other individual intelligences, and it becomes the sole object of his will. As a result, he is attracted to the power of Melkor to effect his designs quickly and masterfully. Thus he is corrupted and is seduced to Melkor's allegiance, perverted to his service, and he becomes the greatest and his most trusted and perilous servant. Some had attached themselves to such major artists and knew things chiefly indirectly through their knowledge of the minds of these masters. Sauron had been attached to the greatest, Melkor, who ultimately became the inevitable rebel and self-worshipper of mythologies that begin with a transcendent, unique creator. After Arda, the earth takes shape and the Ainur descend upon it. Melkor gradually sets his malevolent scheme in motion, a scheme of a much grander scope than Sauron's would in the later ages be. In order to gain authority over Arda, he lets most of his being pass into the physical constituents of the earth. Hence all things that are born on earth and live on and by it are liable to be stained, and in this way Arda is marred. When Melkor is confronted by the existence of other inhabitants of Arda with other wills and intelligences, like elves and men, he is enraged by the mere fact of their existence, and his sole ultimate object becomes their destruction, and to bring about a formless chaos upon Arda. And in this the two Dark Lords are much unalike, both in the scale of their evil and in their intentions. Sauron had never reached this stage of nihilistic madness. He did not object to the existence of the world, so long as he could do what he liked with it. He still had the relics of positive purposes that descended from the good of the nature in which he began. It had been his virtue, and therefore also the cause of his fall and of his relapse, that he loved order and coordination, and disliked all confusion and wasteful friction. While both Morgoth and Sauron have a deep hatred for the children of Ilúvatar, Melkor endeavors to break their wills and the wills of other intelligent creatures, and to subordinate them to or absorb them into his own before destroying their bodies. Sauron, on the other hand, intends to dominate them and to establish a control over their wills and their minds. The uncorrupted Valar, therefore, yearned for the children before they came and loved them afterwards as creatures other than themselves, independent of them and their artistry. Children as being weaker and more ignorant than the Valar, but of equal lineage, deriving being direct from the one, even though under their authority as rulers of Arda. The corrupted, as was Melkor, Morgoth and his followers, of whom Sauron was one of the chief, saw in them the ideal material for subjects and slaves to whom they could become masters and gods, envying the children and secretly hating them in proportion as they became rebels against the One, and Manwë, his lieutenant in Ea. In Morgoth's Ring, we learn that during the first stage, Sauron's skills in planning and calculation surpass those of Morgoth. Though of immensely smaller native power than his master, he remained less corrupt, cooler, and more capable of calculation, at least in the elder days, and before he was bereft of his lord and fell into the folly of imitating him and endeavoring to become himself supreme lord of Middle-earth. While Morgoth still stood, Sauron did not seek his own supremacy, but worked and schemed for another, desiring the triumph of Melkor, whom in the beginning he had adored. He thus was often able to achieve things first conceived by Melkor, which his master did not or could not complete in the furious haste of his malice. When the first stage concludes and Morgoth is utterly defeated, Sauron, being but a mere servant and not a Dark Lord yet, repents of his evil deeds out of fear for the wrath of the Lords of the West. Then Eonwë, the herald of Manwë, commands him to return to Valinor and receive the judgment of the powers. But Sauron, being ashamed, refuses the command of his peer and sought the pardon of the Valar, for under Morgoth his power had been great. He was given an opportunity of repentance when Morgoth was overcome, but could not face the humiliation of recantation and suing for pardon. Therefore, when Eonwë departed, he hid himself in Middle-earth, and he fell back into evil, for the bonds that Morgoth had laid upon him were very strong, and so his temporary turn to good and benevolence ended in a greater relapse until he became the main representative of evil of later ages. In all the deeds of Melkor during the elder days, in the deceits of his cunning, and in all his vast works, Sauron had a part, and was only less evil than his master, in that for long he had served another, and not himself. At the dawn of the second age of Middle-earth, Sauron rises like a shadow of Morgoth and a ghost of his malice, and walks behind him on the same ruinous path down into the void. He aims to become the lord of all Middle-earth, although at first with fair motives. But at the beginning of the second age, he was still beautiful to look at, or could still assume a beautiful visible shape, and was not indeed wholly evil, not unless all reformers who want to hurry up with reconstruction and reorganization are wholly evil, even before pride and the lust to exert their will eat them up. he lingers in Middle-earth very slowly, beginning with fair motives, the reorganizing and rehabilitation of the ruin of Middle-earth, neglected by the gods. He becomes a reincarnation of evil and a thing lusting for complete power, and so consumed ever more fiercely with hate, especially of gods and elves. In the Silmarillion, we are told of Sauron's actions during this time. Now Sauron's lust and pride increased until he knew no bounds, and he determined to make himself master of all things in Middle-earth, and to destroy the elves, and to compass, if he might, the downfall of Númenor. He brooked no freedom, nor any rivalry, and he named himself Lord of the Earth, a mask he still could wear, so that if he wished, he might deceive the eyes of men, seeming to them wise and fair, but he ruled rather by force and fear, if they might avail, and those who perceived his shadow spreading over the world called him the Dark Lord, and named him the Enemy, and he gathered again under his government all the evil things of the days of Morgoth that remained on earth or beneath it, and the orcs were at his command, and multiplied like flies. In the following ages, Sauron achieves an even greater control over his orcs than his master, and he reduces them almost to an ant-like life, serving under his will. Sauron in time managed to unite them all in unreasoning hatred of the elves and of men who associated with them, while the orcs of his own trained armies were so completely under his will that they would sacrifice themselves without hesitation at his command. Moreover, the Dark Lord manages to acquire greater dominion than Morgoth over men as well, perverting them to his dreadful allegiance and his foul worship, and growing to a master and god to them under a dominion of torment. And he proved even more skillful than his master, also in the corruption of men who were beyond the reach of the wise, and in reducing them to a vassalage in which they would march with the orcs, and vie with them in cruelty and destruction. All through the twilight of the Second Age, the shadow is growing in the east of Middle-earth, spreading its sway more and more over men, who multiply as the elves begin to fade. In the east and south, well nigh all men were under his dominion. To them Sauron was both king and god, and they feared him exceedingly, for he surrounded his abode with fire. Thus, as the Second Age draws on, we have a great kingdom and evil theocracy growing up in Middle-earth. The second Dark Lord benefits from the fact that he only inherits the corruption of Arda, whereas Morgoth in his time had to disseminate his vast power in order to bring it about. Sauron, however, inherited the corruption of Arda, and only spent his much more limited power on the rings, for it was the creatures of earth in their minds and wills that he desired to dominate. Sauron was greater effectively in the Second Age than Morgoth at the end of the First, because though he was far smaller by natural stature, he had not yet fallen so low. Eventually, he also squandered his power of being in the endeavor to gain control of others, but he was not obliged to expend so much of himself. Sauron's relatively smaller power was concentrated, Morgoth's vast power was disseminated. Well into the Second Age, the Dark Lord Sauron will seek to dominate the whole of Middle-earth, with the purpose of mastering the wills of the elves, he will attempt to exert his power over them through the creation of the rings of power, and he will stretch his hand even across the source of the sea to the mighty realm of the men of Numenor. More about this in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one on My Govanen. Namarie.